only thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton. We encourage you to visit our websites at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. Every day looking at things from both a biblical and a historical point of view. And David, often we say the intersection of faith and culture, not just faith and politics, because it really is about the entire culture and, frankly, our entire life. And so how does our faith influence how we vote? How does our faith influence how we run our business, how we raise our children? It's really our faith giving us the principles that we're going to live our life by.
Yeah, faith does that, and there's some great principles in there. I mean, there's such principles. I love the way that Ben Franklin pointed out to Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine had attacked Christianity, etc. And Paine talked about how moral a person he was, how good a person he was, how loyal he was, how he had integrity, etc. And Franklin just, yeah, but you learn all that stuff in your Christian education. You seem to have forgotten where you got those principles. And so there are principles that even if you are not a believer, even if you're not a Christian, even if you're not a religious person, they're great principles to run your life by. And Ten Commandments is like that. You know, if my next door neighbor is an atheist and doesn't believe in God, you know, if he'll live by don't steal and don't murder me and don't take my property and don't take my wife, he'll make a great neighbor, whether he is religious himself or not. So those are great principles. And by the way, speaking of the Ten Commandments, there is an interesting principle in the Ten Commandments that I think we don't emphasize it often enough. Consider the Fifth Commandment. Fifth Commandment says to honor your mother and your father, honor your parents. Oh, by the way, you can also use that one as another verse that affirms traditional marriage, because it's a father and a mother. It's not two fathers, two mothers, or some combination thereof. It's honor your parents.
Good point. We skip that a lot.
Yeah,
that's a great
right.
point.
We skip that one, but that's another one that talks about what a family is and who your parents are, and you've got two, and they're male and female. But nonetheless, honor your father and your mother. And so we have those commandments. You know, Jesus obviously repeats many of the Ten Commandments in his own teachings. And then you get over into Ephesians. And in the book of Ephesians, Paul goes back through those commandments, and he dwells on that one for a moment. And he talks about the Ten Commandments. He said, this is the first command with promise. And you go, what's that? You know, and the command is very simple. You honor your father and your mother. Your days will be long on the earth. You'll be blessed, etc. So that's the first command that God gave, where that if you did that, there will be a blessing that follows with that. And that doesn't mean your parents are always right, not by a long shot, but it still means you honor them. We're told the same thing with husbands and wives, that you submit yourself to each other in the Lord. You know, if one of them's not doing what the Lord wants and says, hey, I want you to go rob a bank for me, you don't say, well, you're my spouse, I'm going to do that. You do it in the Lord. Well, it's the same with parents. You honor your parents regardless of whether they're in the Lord or not, but you still honor them, and you get a blessing for that. Now, that's different from obeying, but it's honoring parents. And I was contemplating that the other day, and I was sitting on a set of a TV program. It's an event that will be showed in about 700 theaters nationally. And as I was going through that and sitting there with a Jewish rabbi and a Christian minister and an astrophysicist, and we were talking about things, and it suddenly struck me, you know, spiritually speaking, for a Christian, it's easy to say honor your parents, which that's Israel and the Jews. Because without Israel and the Jews, there is no Christianity. I mean, we're a direct derivative of that. Romans 11 makes it very, very clear that the Jews, they're the roots, and we're grafted in. We're wild branches grafted into the roots. And so don't get cocky about the Jews, because they weren't grafted into you. You were grafted into them. And I thought, wow. If I honor my parents, that means I need to be honoring Israel, honoring the Jews. I'm not a Jew. I'm not from Israel. But that's the first biblical command with promise, which took me back to Genesis 12, where that God gave the covenant promise to Abraham. Says, look, here's the deal. You're going to have descendants. They're going to form a nation. Whoever blesses them, I'll bless. Whoever curses them, I'll curse. It's the same thing. And for Christians particularly, this is really significant. But what's happening right now in Washington with the president, with our administration, what's happening in campuses across the country, what's happening in so many evangelical churches is we don't want to honor our parents in a spiritual sense of Israel or Judaism. And so with all the news that was going out there, we thought it would be fun to have one of the top guys in the world that is known for being a supporter of Israel and the Jews, a very evangelical, biblical Christian guy, to talk about some of the news that's out there. And that's Pastor John Hagee from San Antonio. So we got some questions to ask Pastor Hagee about what's going on in the world with respect to where we are with the Jews.
Stay with us, folks. Back in a moment with Pastor John Hagee here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Often today, it seems that the federal government has become too intrusive into local matters, and federal micromanagement has now unfortunately become the norm in education, law enforcement, religious expressions, and even on what is and is not moral. Strikingly, the Founding Fathers had intended that the federal government never intrude into any of these issues. As Thomas Jefferson explained, taking from the states the moral rule of their citizens and subordinating it to the federal government would break up the foundations of the Union. I believe the states can best govern our home concerns and the federal government our foreign ones. According to Thomas Jefferson, the original plan was for the federal government to direct foreign affairs, but for the states and local communities to direct the domestic and the moral ones.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live. With us now, our good friend, Pastor John Hagee. Always good to have you, Pastor. Thanks for coming back on.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Rick.
Hey, and by the way, thrilled to see that you were honored as one of the top 10 non-Jews positively influencing the Jewish future in 2014. Man, it just speaks so highly of you and the church and all that you guys do, and we're just blessed to call you friend and thrilled that you guys have stood up for Israel the way you have over the years.
Well, Rick, it was a great honor to be on a list with 4 prime ministers, Rupert Murdoch, who's the owner of Fox News and the Wall Street Journal, as well as Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader. Any day that a country boy from Texas and on that list, that's a great day.
Well, I was blown away by the numbers that Christians United for Israel, now that you started, has over 1.2 million members.
No, that number is way behind. We are actually 2,100,000
Wow.
as of this month.
That's incredible. And it speaks well, too, for just the fact that Christians realize the importance of standing with Israel, and in no small part thanks to you and other pastors that have stood up to help educate the Christian evangelical community on that.
Well, we appreciate everyone's support across the nation, because supporting Israel is not a political issue, it's a Bible issue.
Yeah.
And if you believe the Bible, you believe the Scripture, then it is indeed a blessing to bless Israel, and it is a curse not to, because God has so established that in Genesis 12.
Well, Pastor, catch us up right now in terms of where we are and what you see as some of the major issues in terms of standing with Israel at this point.
Well, as I said, standing with Israel is a Bible issue. In the Genesis 1:1 is where God draws the line in the sand. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God, as the creator of the earth, owned the earth. And then in Genesis 12:3 said, I will bless those who bless you, Abraham, and your family. And then God, as the owner of the world, entered into a real estate covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants forever. And the word forever means exactly that. That's recorded in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17 and 19 more times in the Old Testament in different ways. The God that we serve is a God of covenant, and that covenant still stands. I know there are a lot of preachers that says that covenant was dependent upon the Jewish people. Not so. That covenant was dependent only on the faithfulness of God, and the God of the Bible keeps the covenants that he makes. And he has instructed Christians in the writings of King David in the Psalms, saying, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Whenever a Christian prays for the peace of Jerusalem, he's actually praying for world peace, because world history indicates that when Jerusalem is at war, the world is at war, and when Jerusalem is at peace, the world has peace. Isaiah said in 62:1, for Zion's sake, that's Israel, I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. That is a commendation for all Christians to speak out for Israel and their right to exist, their right to defend themselves by themselves against all enemies, and their right to live within defensible borders. St. Paul says in Romans 15:27, for if the Gentiles, that would be us, have benefited from the Jewish spiritual things, it is an obligation of the Gentiles to bless the Jewish people in material things. The spiritual things the Jewish people have given to us are the Old Testament prophets, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, the Word of God, the Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, the 12 disciples, the Apostle Paul. If you take the Jewish contribution away from Christianity, we simply would not exist. These are just a few of the Bible reasons that God has commissioned every Christian to stand by Israel, and Israel needs it now more than ever, because they're surrounded by nations that are screaming for their blood, and we've got a president in Washington that's putting daylight between Washington and Jerusalem every day in every way that he can.
Pastor John Hagee is our guest. Stay with us. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the minds of many today, government is a purely secular institution and is not in any way to be joined to religious principles. The result is that too often our public policies are now enacted without any consideration of their spiritual consequences. However, the Founding Fathers believed that even a political act should always be examined from a spiritual viewpoint. For example, in his inaugural address, President George Washington declared, "We ought to be persuaded that the favorable smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained." President George Washington believed that the blessings of heaven would reside on this nation only so long as its national policies embraced godly standards.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We're back. Thanks for staying with us here at WallBuilders Live. Pastor John Hagee with us. Pastor Hagee, before the break, you were talking about that it's more important than ever to stand with Israel, especially when our own White House is not doing so. I mean, I can't imagine even 15, 20 years ago the level of hostility from the UN, from nations around the country, not just Arab nations but other nations, towards Israel. It is getting to the point where very few are standing with them, and which makes our stance with them even more important. And yet, we probably have the most hostility towards Israel we've ever seen from America.
Absolutely. Just stop to think that when a senior member of the Obama administration can refer to the Prime Minister of Israel with a barnyard epithet and not be fired and not even be exposed, there's a real relationship crisis between the White House and Jerusalem. When the president refuses to use the word terrorist to describe ISIS for cutting off the heads of children and crucifying Christians, yet when the Speaker of the House, Boehner, invites the Prime Minister of Israel to speak at Congress, which is his right to do so, the president says, quote, there's going to be hell to pay, close quote. We have a crisis in relationship between this nation and the nation of Israel. Be very sure the day America turns its back on Israel will be the day God turns his back on the United States of America.
I hadn't thought about this as a question for you today, but as you say that, it makes me think, okay, well, we're about to enter into elections for a new president. The primaries are going to be kicking in. We'll have debates this summer, I'm sure, to start in both parties. Is this an issue that the church should be looking at and Christians should be looking at when they begin to think about who they're going to support for president? Should we look at how they support Israel?
Absolutely. As in my book, that should be a top priority, because supporting Israel is an issue of our national security. God says, I will bless those who bless you, and America has in times past blessed the Jewish people, and I believe that's a very fundamental explanation of our profound prosperity. And then he says, and I will curse those who curse you. That word curse means to those who abuse you in a verbal way. We are doing that right now as a nation. The prophet Joel in the 3rd chapter says, I'm going to bring all nations to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is a place of judgment, because they have divided up my land Israel. When America is supporting a nation, the Palestinians, that want Israel to abandon its present geographical land and live in the green line that was drawn by the United Nations, and when the President of the United States is trying to divide Jerusalem, America is dividing up the land, and in black and white in the Bible it tells you that enrages God himself. I think that our position on Israel is a top priority to America's success of survival.
How did I saw recently where HarperCollins was selling books that have maps that no longer have Israel in them. This is specifically to Middle Eastern markets where the schools there didn't want Israel on the map. So when a company like HarperCollins does that, how should we as evangelicals respond to that? I mean, they even own some of the biggest Christian publishing.
Find out what HarperCollins owns and boycott that product. Write the owners of HarperCollins as a citizen and say that you will no longer use their products in the future, and do that by the tens of thousands. When America starts standing up like that, oil companies, HarperCollins, everyone from the White House down to the church house will start recognizing the importance of Israel in the economy of God.
Which means our position on Israel should impact how we spend our dollars and who we shop with, who we vote for. I mean, this ought to be a top priority for us.
Absolutely. No question.
Well, good stuff, Pastor. I tell you, it's a great vehicle what you're doing with Christians United for Israel to get us informed about this. We don't hear enough of this from the church itself, and would encourage pastors out there to get plugged into your organization and preach this from the pulpit, to talk about from the pulpit how important our support of Israel is. We appreciate your friendship and appreciate you coming on and keeping us informed.
Thank you, Rick. It's my pleasure to be with you. Any of your listeners would like to be a part of Christians United for Israel, they can reach us at 210-477-4714. We're looking forward to going to 3 million people.
All right, we're going to put that on our website today as well and get folks over to your website. Pastor John Hagee, thank you, brother. You have a good day.
Thank you, Ray.
Back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Special thanks to Pastor John Hagee for joining us today. David, I think he's right. If you're really going to follow biblical commands, just like you were saying in terms of even the Ten Commandments, you got to honor Israel. You got to stand with them. And some people might say, well, but I'm not the president, so I don't have a role in that, or I'm not a congressman. But the pastor pointed to it. I mean, we should be calling those congressmen.
Yeah,
we should be looking at who we're electing. This should be way up on our list, if not at the top of our list.
Well, we called our congressman when we were $18 trillion in debt, said, you guys got to stop this. This is nuts. Well, we need to be doing the same thing. And by the way, I love what Pastor Hagee said. It's a great point. He said God made a real estate covenant with Israel, not just a covenant with them. He made a real estate covenant. He said, this land right here, and he delineated it. He said, to this river and over to the Mediterranean, to the sea. And so he did make a real estate covenant with them. And for us, as he pointed out in Joel, that thing that if you start trying to chop up the land, God's going to whack you because that's part of his covenant. Now, something that Pastor Hagee said, he mentioned that Obama is trying to put daylight between us and Israel. And that goes back to something way back at the beginning of his presidency in July 2009. Obama brought a bunch of Jewish leaders to the White House, and he told them that he was going to seek to put, quote, daylight between America and Israel. And that's what he announced. I'm going to try to get us apart from Israel. And it's interesting, if you go to the most recent State of the Union he did a few weeks ago, there were two threats in there of what he would veto. He said, you bring me this is what I'll veto. And one of them was, if you try to do anything to put sanctions on Iran, I'll veto that. Now, you got to understand that even the Democrats in the Senate have been very clear since the election that we think the president's wrong on this. You've got to stop a nuclear Iran. We're not stopping a nuclear Iran. Iran has said, we get nukes. We're not only going after Israel, we're coming after America. Now we find out they're doing these intercontinental ballistic missiles as well. And so we're not doing anything to stop that, to slow that down. And here's what becomes absolutely, I want to say striking, but appalling is a better word to me. And I was not aware of this. I was doing some research last week and found this. But so far, the Obama administration 6 times has leaked secret information about what Israel is doing, has put it out to the public, and 4 of those 6 involve what Israel is doing to limit the nuclear threat from Iran, because Iran said Israel's the first one to go. So if you're in Iran, if you're in Israel and you know Iran is a regional neighbor, close neighbor, and they have declared that they're going to take you out and they have the capability to do so, you better believe that you'll start doing something to defend yourself. So in 2010, the Obama administration leaked information of a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia because the Saudis were going to allow Israel to use their airspace to wage an attack against Iran and its nuclear facilities. Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to have nukes. Because Saudi has helped us. And so here's a deal where we now have the Saudis working with the Israelis to limit. And the Obama administration releases that information about the secret agreement between Israel and the Saudis.
Undercutting our allies.
Undercutting our allies. March 22nd, 2012, the Obama administration leaked information in the New York Times on war exercises that Israel was doing. They were practicing on a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. And so they were laying out how this would play out. And so here they are trying to map this out, how they would do it, how they would go about, what's the best way to limit casualties, et cetera. And so the Obama administration leaks that to the New York Times. Says, here's what Israel's doing. They're making plans to take these nukes out in Iran. Then on March 29th of 2012, ABC News reports about Iran's nuclear program and the possibility of an Israeli military strike. And they go through and talk about what Israel is doing and how they're getting ready for this strike. And they've been given access to air bases in Azerbaijan. So there's another country willing to say to Israel, hey, these guys with nukes, they scare us. You guys are welcome to launch your planes out of Azerbaijan and go into Iran. And so now you have the Obama administration leaking that information. Then on April the 8th, 2012, the New Yorker responded about leaked information that the Israeli intelligence agency was helping fund and train the Iranian opposition within Iran. So now the Obama administration is leaking information that Israel is the one helping train the more moderates within Iran to take out that administration. I mean, here's the Obama administration leaking all this. They had more leaks in May of 2013 and then in November 2013. This is just unbelievable that they create so much distance between us and Israel that they're leaking secret intelligence about what Israel is doing to all these communities to help Iran. Why would you do that? You know, and the president threatens to veto any legislation that puts sanctions on a nuclear Iran. This is nuts. But that's what Pastor Hagee's talking about. And if this doesn't disturb us, it should. And if this doesn't make us call our legislators and say, you have got to get this fixed. And they can do that through budget. They can do that through limiting the State Department.
That's right. They don't have to wait for a new president.
Right.
Congress can do some things here.
That's right. And good for Boehner that he's invited Netanyahu in, and good for Boehner he's not backing up with all the bluster of President Obama. But as Hagee said, when America turns its back on Israel, God turns his back on America. And I think that covenantally that's a fairly accurate statement. So we have to take a stand on this stuff.
Thanks for listening today, folks. For more information, visit WallBuilders.com and WallBuildersLive.com. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided forever.